Sadly, despite our willingness to bargain, Ford and GM have refused to make meaningful progress at the table.
While he may say they're excited about the progress that's being made, I still have no sense that we are going to see a resolution to these strikes anytime soon.
Make no mistake, the entire global auto industry is going all electric. It's a race to see who can get quality EVs to the market most quickly at a good price.
And that in part has been because Tesla has benefited from paying its employees with stock comp. With the stock now where it is, that may not be the same types of benefits in the future. So wages are going to go up at Tesla.
All that and more. So let's get to it. Tesla ended up 1.5% in the green on Friday, but as you might be able to discern, despite all the volatility, Tesla has remained relatively flat. For the week, up 2%, but going through cardiac arrest all through the week. The month of September is finally over. How did Tesla do? Down almost 2%. Are you catching the trend here? Tesla has some of the most volatile reconsolidation periods ever. Year to date, still up over 100%, and for the calendar year, down only 6% now. The real question remains, does Q3 bring more pain for Tesla?
Sadly, despite our willingness to bargain, Ford and GM have refused to make meaningful progress at the table. That's why at noon Eastern Time today, we will expand our strike to these two companies. To be clear, negotiations haven't broke down. We're still talking with all three companies. And I'm still very hopeful that we can reach a deal that reflects the incredible sacrifices and contributions our members have made over the last decade. But I also know that what we win at the bargaining table depends on the power we build on the job. It's time to use that power.
Actions speak louder than words.
The UAW president is speaking right now, giving some details about the next wave of walkouts. Let's get to Phil LeBeau. Phil?
Carl, we will have two final assembly plants, one from Ford and one from General Motors, where the UAW members there will walk off the job at noon Eastern Time today. We're talking about the Chicago assembly plant for Ford. That's where they build the Explorer. A total of 7,000 workers, by the way, between these two plants. And then for General Motors, it's the Lansing Delta Township final assembly plant. Sean Fain just a few minutes ago saying that Ford and GM failed to make meaningful progress in their negotiations with the UAW. By comparison, he just said that the conversations with Stellantis have improved. He is excited about the momentum in those negotiations. So for today, there are no additional strikes being called at Stellantis. But again, two final assembly plants, Ford's Chicago Assembly and GM's Lansing Delta Township. Those two are going on strike, an additional 7,000 members. That brings in total, after noon, approximately 25,000 UAW members who will be walking off the job.
Is it just me? Or is it getting hot in here? How long can either side stand to keep this strike going?
Give me some context on the Ford here. And, you know, I was under the impression that they might not do an additional work stoppage at a Ford plant. Has something changed in the dynamic there, or was that expected?
I'm not surprised, given what we heard earlier this week when, during their negotiations, apparently the conversation revolved around what's going to be happening, at least some of the conversation, what's going to happen with a planned EV battery plant that is going to be built in Michigan. And Ford put out a statement, I think it was Tuesday afternoon, saying, you know what, we're going to have to reassess our commitment to this $3.5 billion investment we're making there on whether or not we can competitively run it. Well, it wasn't long after that the UAW put out a statement saying, all we're looking for is a just transition. Those are the words of the UAW, a just transition to electric vehicles. So that told you right there that there's a contentious issue on the table between Ford and the UAW. So I'm not surprised. Last week, Ford was exempted from additional strikes. This week, it's Stellantis.
Just to touch up on the just transition to battery electric vehicles, internal combustion engines are currently profitable. I get the pushback from the UAW. Predicting exponential growth is an act of futility. No one can really do it well because our brains are conditioned to a very linear path. As battery electric vehicles exponentially increase in adoption, that'll leave the internal combustion engine in the lurch. Is that 3 years from now? 8 years? 15 years from now? Who the fuck knows? But I know one thing is for certain. It's going to happen quite unexpectedly. Right now, Tesla is the only US automaker producing millions of EVs. You could be making plenty of money producing internal combustion engines until you can't. And then by the time 2030 rolls around, you looking like Boo-Boo the Fool because you didn't make the transition when it was necessary. But if Ford, GM, Stellantis aren't producing high quality EVs in large numbers within the next 5 years, gonna get real. Maybe a little too real.
While he may say they're excited about the progress that's being made, I still have no sense that we are going to see a resolution to these strikes anytime soon.
UAW strike, yet another thing we need to keep our eyes on. Phil LeBeau has the latest. What do we know, Phil?
You know, Scott, if you want to see how far apart Ford and the UAW are, earlier today, Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, along with other Ford executives, held a briefing with reporters and analysts talking about the fact that another Ford plant, the UAW, is on strike. In that briefing, he said this is a case where he believes the UAW calling these strikes premeditated. They're holding the representation of future EV battery plants as hostage in these negotiations. I mean, he blasted the UAW.
Damn!
Well, now the UAW is out with a statement from President Sean Fain, and here's what he says. Listen to this carefully. I don't know why Jim Farley is lying about the state of negotiations. It could be because he failed to show up for bargaining this week, as he has for most of the past 10 weeks. If he were there, he'd know we gave Ford a comprehensive proposal on Monday and still haven't heard back. He would also know that we are far apart on core economic proposals like retirement security and post-retirement health care, as well as job security in this EV transition, which Farley himself says is going to cut 40% of our members' jobs.
Ooh, shots fired! There's a reason why these negotiations shouldn't be aired out in public. Don't get it twisted. This is a hostage situation. And I find it hard to believe that this is just mere coincidence on the locations of these particular shutdowns. Sean Fain is being a tactical genius on the level of Zhuge Liang. They know what they're doing. They're trying to hurt them where it counts. All those years of exploiting your workers, the bill is coming due.
Like a good neighbor, we're available 24/7. Name the time and the place you want to settle a fair contract for our members, and we'll be there. That last point about being a good neighbor is in reference to Jim Farley saying that Sean Fain is on TV more than the State Farm guys on TV. Bottom line is this, Scott, we're nowhere close to a contract being reached between Ford and the UAW, and basically you can say that with the other automakers as well. Long ways to go before we see this resolved, and as I've said for some time, Scott, do not be surprised if we see more strikes in the weeks to come.
The strike is on until they make a deal. How big of a deal is it, and when does it become a big deal?
Look, I think it's already a big deal. And look, we all want to see American workers earn higher wages. But it's come in at a tough time for Ford and GM, and here's why. First, Ford and GM are both struggling to sell just 100,000 units in 2023 here. And that's compared to 2 million units for Tesla. So they're supposed to be catching up here. They're at less than 5%. So if those numbers drop down, that hurts. Second, Tesla's triggering a global price war. And I think we've seen it. Tesla's had 6 cost reductions this year alone. General Motors, Volkswagen, Ford, they're all trying to keep up. But remember the big picture. Not only is Tesla selling a lot more electric vehicles, but their net margins are 12.9%. Compare that with 6% at GM, 4% at Volkswagen, 2.4% at Ford. If you're raising rates at costs at those companies, that's coming at just the wrong time.
Your mother right. Industry-leading margins allow you that kind of leeway. You're already losing vast amounts of money for every battery electric vehicle that you sell. Now the cost to produce these things are gonna go up.
Now the good news here is for consumers. Tesla sees an advantage. They're seizing it. The Chinese, and we'll come to that, BYD are doing the exact same thing, driving costs down. EVs are going to be cheaper than ever before, but it's going to put the squeeze on automakers with high cost structures. So GM and Ford need to be careful.
Yeah.
This will be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because the President of the United States, who's a union-friendly president, I mean, I don't want to put the politics in there, but, you know, maybe it's cutting the CEO's salary or something because he's marching with them, sort of implying that they should get more. And I know they were asking for 40%, came down to 30%. But if these automakers are really barely making the line, Elon Musk, for example, said they're marching themselves straight into bankruptcy if they give in
Truer words have never been spoken.
to these higher wage demands and a 32-hour work week. There's a real disconnect, isn't there? Quickly, because I have so many questions for you.
Look, there is, and Elon may be a little crazy, but on that one point, he's probably right. Again, we want to see American workers getting paid more, but in industries that are struggling to be competitive and break even, and make no mistake, the entire global auto industry is going all electric. It's a race to see who can get quality EVs to the market most quickly at a good price.
Ding, 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 ding! Tell him what he's won, Johnny!
Tesla's done that a little better than any one heretofore. Chinese are putting pressure on. So the American automakers are going to need to get more efficient more quickly. I just went through the gross margin numbers or the net margin numbers, but when Tesla is at 12.9% in gross margins, GM, Ford lagging quite a bit, something's got to give here. So I'm hoping that with the new battery production and so on, other efficiencies, GM and Ford can bring margins up and be competitive, but they're going to have to kick into a higher gear sooner rather than later. And the Chinese are coming.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You know, Steve, I had on a bull-bear debate recently. It was really about Tesla. I'd love to ask you some poignant questions, and if you could respond to them, because I think that, you know, the first was Tesla. The argument was Tesla makes batteries. Tesla doesn't make batteries. Does Tesla make batteries?
Our host is still shell-shocked from the Gordon Johnson experience.
Yes or no? Have they made a battery?
Look, there's not a black and white question here. What they do is they partner with the CATLs, the Panasonics, and the LG Chems of the world. But increasingly, they've taken battery production in-house. They have a cost advantage over virtually everybody else except for the Chinese. And that is part of the reason they have such high gross margins, which is great news. Second, they're the masters at selling OTA, or over-the-air software services. That's great. And third, they lead the world in robotization. So that's what's giving them the price edge. The Americans are going to have to keep up. The Chinese are coming quickly. This market's, it is fascinating. There's going to be a restructuring of the global auto market like we've never seen before.
Are you concerned about Tesla deliveries going forward, or market share when it comes to the other automakers, particularly in China?
Well, absolutely. And look, I'm an American. I want to see American companies win, whether it's Tesla, GM, or Ford. Right now, here are the numbers. Tesla has 21.7% of global EV market share. And again, EVs are what matters. Every auto company in the world is going all electric. BYD, a fairly close second at 16.2%. There's a huge drop to the other Chinese companies in Volkswagen. So you've got to get EV production up and going. You've got to do it profitably. And BYD is really right on Tesla's heels. They make a good car, low cost, Chinese government subsidizing batteries. That's going to be the real smackdown. But there's a lot of concern about whether people want to drive a Chinese car, not just because they're a competitive country, but because cars are now filled with IoT devices. And do you want a car that could be, or frankly is, listening to you? I think a lot of people are going to think twice on that one.
This is where I have to disagree. Let's not forget the Chinese make everything. Everything? Everything. This would be a terrible reason not to purchase the computer on wheels that will make your life so much easier. And the Chinese have an excellent vehicle lineup. But if they come in here price competitive despite tariffs and the IRA, game over for any legacy auto manufacturer that is starting way behind the power curve.
Yeah, and when it comes to valuations, I mean, I know Tesla, it has a lofty valuation. I mean, we've had guests on who think it's worth $25, basically, which seems significantly an undervalue for a name like Tesla. What kind of stocks do you think can have some upside potential in the world of autos, here or abroad?
Well, I think there's three to look at right off the bat. First, let's get real on Tesla. Most profitable auto company in the world, growing 40% year over year. They'll be over 100 billion this year. They're trading at a 7 or 8x multiple. That's not bad for a company with numbers that look more like a tech company than an auto company. Give them credit. If you're looking at a bet in the auto market going forward, I think you'd have to take a long and hard look at BYD. Keep in mind, they're not only a leader in the Chinese market, the world's largest auto market, they're already selling a lot of vehicles in Europe, South America, Mexico, Israel.
Sorry,
they're
Steve,
executing.
What name was that? What name was that you said you have to take a look at?
BYD.
BYD, yeah,
is
that's,
right
the
on
one, that's the one
Tesla's.
Buffett likes. Okay.
It's the
And
one
what else
Buffett
do you
likes.
think is probably?
I think you've got to give a close look at Hyundai. The Koreans have really jumped to the fore, and Volkswagen. Those are the major competitors, if you will, Europe, Korea, China.
I see. In the meantime, the UAW strike, any final thoughts for GM, Ford, and Stellantis? And any big picture trends, whether people are trying to shop for a car or anything you want to add?
Well, look, my advice to them is get this settled soon. And you may feel like it's a victory to have higher wages, and I'm all for it. But at some point, you've got to keep an eye on gross margins. And as you said, whether it's cutting senior executive staff or making assembly lines more efficient, that's going to be the key to winning in the future. Today, and here's one last fact for you, Tesla can make their Model Y in 10 hours. That is compared to Volkswagen that takes, and Ford and GM, closer to 30 hours to roll a car off the assembly line. We've got to put old world thinking behind us. Labor needs to understand this as well. It's all going to be about robotization, higher efficiency, higher gross margins. That's going to be the path to winning. I just hope an American company is the one who can figure it out.
Oh, there is an American company figuring it out. It just happens to be Tesla.
And my next guest says this negotiation is ultimately a fight about the big three's transition to EVs. They have a lower labor footprint than traditional combustion engine cars, could result in job cuts. Already, the legacy automakers are paying workers about 20% more than Tesla per hour, a gap that'll widen when a wage increase is ultimately agreed to. But could this actually also pressure Tesla to raise its wages or even cause its workers to unionize? Let's bring in Dan Levy. He covers autos at Barclays. Dan, really appreciate you stealing a couple seconds away from the Ford call. Listen, bottom line it here, especially after hearing some of those comments. Do you think that these shares will be under more pressure in the weeks to come?
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me. You know, our view on the way the strike has been impacting the stock prices is that a lot of this was already being priced in from a profit standpoint. The impact right now is transitory. Right now, we think it's roughly for Ford and GM, $80 to $90 million per week of lost profit from production, but they can make that up. Really, the question remains around how much cost they will ultimately absorb. We think for now, the stocks are okay. If this continues to extend for some time, there could be additional pressure. But again, the key question for the automakers is how much cost will they ultimately absorb given the challenges they have in the future on EV transition.
Right. I mean, again, colleagues of yours, Dan Ives over at Wedbush, thinks it could be pretty fatal. I mean, he's not very optimistic about it, certainly if the full demands are agreed to.
Yeah, they certainly won't agree to the full demands. That's not going to happen. And we actually think that the way that the negotiations are shaping out, some of the things like wages, COLA, we think there actually will be resolution on that. Really, the key question in our mind is around product allocation, job security. The automakers are seeking greater flexibility. UAW is seeking greater job security. You know, as we noted, the Marshall battery plant that, you know, you and Phil just referenced, that's really one of the questions here is, do those plants unionize? What happens in an EV world? We think that the automakers are going to need to seek flexibility, given there will be likely a labor impact as you move to an EV world.
Finally, how are GM and Ford going to compete? They already have a $65 an hour labor cost, where Tesla's is $45 to $50. Will they be successful in bringing Teslas up? Because otherwise, their cost is about to go even higher.
We think their cost will increase. This is naturally going to happen, not only across Tesla, but probably across the transplant OEMs. I think this is naturally the case. Can they unionize? We've noted in the past it's been a tougher effort by the UAW, but and that in part has been because Tesla has benefited from paying its employees with stock comp. With the stock now where it is, that may not be the same types of benefits in the future. So wages are going to go up at Tesla. I think for them, though, and this is the case for all of the automakers, it's a constant battle on all aspects of cost to offset these different inflationary pressures.
The likelihood of Tesla unionizing is relatively small, simply because of the stock value. Hell, I'd consider working at Tesla if I could get the employee discount on the stock price. Your blood, sweat, and tears go into making that stock price climb even higher. The harder you work, the more money you make. That's the problem with Ford, GM, and Stellantis. Those guys are breaking their backs, while the E-Suite is sitting pretty. Don't get me wrong, their transition will be rough and damaging to all, but the pain will not be felt equally. I just want to be clear, what's happening with the UAW will not impact Tesla in the slightest. It will continue to be business as usual. In conclusion, the UAW cranks up the heat just a few more degrees. Jim Farley and Sean Fain exchanged some witty barbs. Tesla already has a massive lead in the EV department, and that lead is widening. And while some people believe this UAW strike is going to bleed into Tesla and some of the other non-unionized EV startups, I'm here to tell you that's a bit of a fallacy, simply because Tesla and these other EV startups are more like tech companies. Their head start in this transformation of the automobile industry is what validates their high market cap. Well, that's all I got for you today. Be easy. Peace.